This is a ring gear, and this is a pinion. And they are what you're gonna wanna upgrade after installing a bigger set of tires. And that's why we're here at Disciple Offroad in Hanford, California. And while I am familiar with and completely capable of working on my own differentials, installing new gears isn't something that I do on a regular basis. And because they do cost a pretty penny, and there are lots of ways you can do things not quite right, I prefer to have guys who really know what they're doing work on it for me, and that's these guys. For those of you who've been following our videos for a while, you know that we just installed 37-inch Nitto Trail grapplers on our brand new Jeep Gladiator. And while the all-new 8-speed automatic transmission is totally awesome and can push them along, I'd be lying if I said we didn't lose some power. And certainly, 8th gear is completely gone on anything other than a flat highway with the wind behind you or driving downhill. So one of the questions that I get from all you guys on a regular basis is what gear ratio should I go with on my Jeep, or your Jeep that is. And so rather than take my opinion for it, I'm gonna actually be talking to Jeremy, the owner of Disciple Offroad, and get his take on it so you can hear it straight from him. So let's talk gears. Jeremy, we have a set of 37-inch tires on our Jeep Gladiator, and one of the questions I get all the time is what ratio should I go with? And so I thought it'd be good to get the gamut of what we can do. Most guys are running 373s, maybe 345s, depending on what model they have. Obviously, our Gladiator came with 410s. Can I push 37-inch tires with the 410s in an 8-speed automatic?
You can, but it's not ideal. So it's not recommended, but you certainly can. And a lot of people do it because a lot of people don't want to spend the money on gears. And it's not a cheap upgrade, but it is doable, but not recommended.
Okay, so we go up to 35-inch tires. What ratio would you recommend for that?
For a 35, we could typically go like a 456 on that. Of course, motors also kind of play a toll in that, especially with diesel. You have a lot more power, so you can get away with a little bit more. But like when you're standard 3.6, a good 456 is good for like a 35-inch tire.
Right. So, but for a lot of guys, they're going to ask, well, it's just such a small upgrade. You know, I actually personally think that at 35s, you could totally get by with 410s, but if you really want to recoup your fuel economy and get that power back, that is the ratio I'd go with. So then in the case of 37s though, what ratio would you recommend?
We typically go to 488s when we start hitting the 37 range, because with 37s, as I'm sure you know, you quickly lose 8th gear and you're not going to see it again. So at least going to a 488, you will get the 8th gear back and get it closer back to factory spec or feeling and power.
Okay, so but what if I'm towing a trailer and I want a little extra power? Would you still stick with 488s?
So certainly when you start doing a trailer, adding bigger tires, you can jump to a 513. So I always tell customers, there is that gray area where you can do 488s for your daily driving, better fuel economy, keep the RPMs down a little bit. But if you do plan on doing way more crawling with it, pulling a trailer, 513s is also a good option for you. Can you get a little bit more of that pep off the line and have a little bit of extra power while towing? So both will work. More of a quality of life or how you purposely want to use your vehicle.
Sure. So from experience, I can tell you that we've installed 513s on our very first jail way back in the day. And with 37-inch tires, there was a lot of power, ton of fun. But as Jeremy just said, the downside is on the highway, at highway speeds, you're going to be on the high side of the RPMs and you're going to be burning a little more gas. So it really is a preference thing. But in this case, what we're going to do, we're going to go with 488s. But for the guys who are going to run something higher, like a 38-inch tire, you would recommend
513s.
That's definitely the way to go with 38-inch tires. And I would personally say that's probably the highest ratio that I personally would go on a Dana 44. Would you agree with me?
100%, yeah.
And the reason is?
Very small ring and pinion on a 538. So it gets really small in the gears when you start pulling them out and comparing them to the two. It puts it in reality like, holy cow, it's a big difference.
And from experience, I can tell you on the trail, we've blown a 538 on a Dana 44 on Moby. It's no fun. So really do yourselves a favor. If you want to run big tires, you want to run 40-inch tires, I would highly recommend a set of 1-tons and then run 538s. In fact, for those of you who have a Dana 30, what do you think the highest ratio is that you should run?
I still don't go past 513 the highest, but even then that starts getting really small on a Dana 30. So definitely not past the 513 on a Dana 30 for sure.
I agree. Personally, I would even say 488 on a Dana 30, but you're pushing it. Anything more than that, you're pushing it.
Yeah.
So as mentioned, we're going to be going with a set of 488 gears and with a set that are brand new from Curry.
Best built-in slide hammer.
Poor man's slide hammer.
Yep. That was easy.
No hammering, no pry bar.
know,
Just
that
fell right out.
Man, I'm not gonna say anything. I'm not gonna jinx it. You know, it's going too smooth. The reason to take the fan apart is so, since this is a two-piece axle shaft now, we need to be able to slide the inner shaft out from the carrier so we can get the carrier out of the housing. So that's why we gotta take this apart for the gears.
Are you seeing more guys doing FAD deletes, or are people just keeping them now?
I think most people are keeping the fads now, and it's very talking to people. They ask, of course, and I'm sure you can contest this. Like, I don't think we've seen any failures at the fad internally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the only failures we've seen are the housing itself cracking at the fad, but internally, we'll pull them out. You'll see how large the splines are. I think the collar's massive, and we haven't seen any failures in that part itself. So
Sure, and then
I think there's way more benefits to having the two-piece, be able to run more positive caster, and all those things with it, and obviously better fuel mileage and all that good stuff. So I think there's more pros with the two-piece than the one-piece.
I'm a fan. I haven't had to bust out a hammer yet, so that's always a good start. Even like on some of our older Jeeps, it's kind of funny. A lot of guys back east, they'll say like, "There's no way that everything's coming off that easy." But when you live out west and you don't have to deal with salt, it's not so bad.
Big difference. Big difference. So much easier than the JKs. The JKs, Rubicons always had obviously the plug. Then they had the plunger in the rear, so you had to pull that out. The rear you did, the front you did, so it was kind of a pain in the butt. And if you didn't put the carrier in right, you would accidentally bend them. So it was kind of a extra step pain in the butt, but these make it way easier.
So there's no more plunger on the dog clutch to detect it?
No, those aren't in the JLJT, so it's just a JK thing. So
awesome.
That's why they kind of built it all into this whole unit here. They kind of simplified some of the JLJT stuff, made it a lot more easier to work with.
Nice.
But I am excited to pull this out though, because this is a different locker that we talked about, and I wish I had another one here just to compare it, to show the difference, because it's certainly a whole different design. Which I'm actually happy, because the two pieces that kind of would intertwine with each other could easily pop out during install or cause issues. So this looks a lot more easier to deal with.
Nice.
Yeah. We're just marking the carrier I see here. So make sure we have our left and left. So we're gonna make sure during install we don't accidentally flip the carrier bearing, because they are machined to the housing. So that way we can always make sure that they have marks. Some factories, they already are marked. They do give you the nice arrows for, you know, out, but just for precaution to make sure nothing gets mixed up, we just stamp them so we know which goes where.
Cool.
So at this point, we'll pull the carrier bearings off. This is also always a good spot to see kind of where the preload is at already on the carrier from factory. So it's in there pretty good, not super tight, but sometimes we've seen pulley covers off and the carrier literally just falls out. So you know you don't have enough preload. There will be a lot of terms we use today with gearing, you know, as far as backlash, carrier preload, pinion depth, and pinion bearing preload. So when referring to carrier preload, we're talking about the force on the outside carrier bearings pressing the race into the bearing. So of course we want it nice and snug so the bearings aren't sloppy, but again, we don't want it too tight, then you overheat the bearings and cause issues or premature failure there. So it's definitely a balancing act of setting the proper preload, but then also when we're setting backlash, we got to make sure we're setting the carrier left and right properly. When referring to backlash, that's going to be referring to the space between the ring gear and the pinion, the movement between the two gears as you're driving or under operation. So too tight, obviously, it's going to get super hot and it won't allow enough oil to get between the gears, and vice versa. Too much open, you're going to have a bunch of slop in those gears and be slapping each other. So there is a fine spec in setting the proper backlash, and that's what we're referring to when we're setting that. You Chad, and give me some hands, buddy. I think that we do this as one person, but we got Chad here, so we're going to tag team this thing. This actually wasn't bad at all. Should be good there. There we go. Push the plug. So try to keep the shims on the same side. So when doing gears, we obviously want to try to stay organized. So as you can see, we keep everything on the passenger. It's going to be on the passenger side here, same with the driver. So whenever we're dealing with all the shims, we'll just hook them on the carrier bearings here just to keep everything where it needs to be and we don't get things mixed up. So the gear is definitely good to be organized and clean at the same time. So we're going to be pulling everything out, carrying everything down to the bare housing, pull all the races out, and then we're going to give the inside of the differential a good cleaning. Make sure there's no any debris. It's pretty new, but it's always good to go through, clean everything out, make sure you're nice and fresh, because you definitely don't want to get any kind of debris in your brand new bearings. So in all the JLJTs, only the rear outer pinion bearing has this roller star bearing. So you'll see later on that the preload of this thing actually sets up really, really light because of the style bearing. It's kind of weird though. This was a fuel economy thing, I believe. It's less resistant. So, I mean, it's like kind of like a nylon, or I want to say plastic housing, but this is standard in all rear JLJT axles. Versus your standard roller bearing that you would typically see, which the front still uses that. This is just a rear thing. So, strange, yeah. But of course the rear takes most of the load on your daily driving, of course. So that's why they did that. Right. So
not as strong, but more fuel efficient.
So another difference between the JLJT and the JKs is that for pinion depth shimming, they actually shim behind the inner race compared to a JK where you would shim your pinion depth under the lower or inner pinion bearing. So in this case, we're going to pull this out and we're going to preserve the OEM one as a starting point for our pinion depth and go off of that. And there is our factory pinion depth shim. So we will save this, try to keep all of our old parts together so we don't get them mixed up with the new. So just a slight comparison, you can see comparing to the new 488 to the factory 410s, even that difference, how much of a difference in the pinion size there is. So just think of a 513 or even a 538, how tiny this starts to get on the ring and pinion. So hence why we talked about earlier, why certain axles, we definitely have a minimum of what we recommend for your gear ratios. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna measure the factory shims that came out of here, and we just kind of use this as a running flow chart to kind of document what's what. As you can see here, I always write this up as I'm looking at the back of the vehicle, so D for driver and passenger side. This will be our pinion depth shims, our backlash final setting, and then our pinion preload. So we're gonna go through, measure all the shims, and get it all charted up.
Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop.
So the JLJTs also add a little more fun to the mix, as the top bearing or the passenger side bearing is a smaller bearing compared to the driver side, which uses a much larger bearing. So this is to help, having the larger bearing on the ring gear side helps take a lot more load on that side of the carrier. So that's another change that Jeep decided to do on these. So of course, now we have to kind of mix match our puller to make sure we can fit the bearings properly to pull them off. And of course the lockers make it a little more tight. I'm trying to remember which one is this. So they make these tight, so I won't be able to get under the actual bottom of the bearing. So typically we can grab the cage of the bearing just enough to pull it up evenly. Give me the black one. Some of these do get pretty tight, but worst case, you have to cut a bearing off. It happens. Yeah, that yellow one is gonna be the tightest one. So we'll go slow, we'll work it, get it to walk up a little bit. Then once we create a gap in the bottom, we'll try to reposition the clamshell to get underneath it more. Bearings suck on these. I hate these things. They're like, these clamshells like just aren't the right size for these. This usually works phenomenal, but these odd sizes, like you see, it just wasn't catching and it just broke the top of the cage. Not a big deal.
Good thing we're not reusing it.
Exactly.
Don't stop. Don't stop.
Well, I was like, I don't want to overcut little by little because obviously I don't want to cut into the carrier, so it gets really thin towards the end there. So this is little micro cuts. So. That's how it's supposed to work. Super great tool when you have good contact on the bearing.
Sure.
So now we're gonna take off the ring gear bolts. So if you plan on doing these yourself, these are torqued really, really tight. And I've seen green Loctite typically on these things. Yeah, so I know for us, when we reset the new torque, it's 130 foot-pounds per bolt, which is a ton. Jakers are usually 100 foot-pounds. So be careful when pulling these off, because you will round these off and then you're out with a flapper wheel, grinding them down, and then, yeah. So I say we, I mean Chad. I'm just kidding.
Pretty much.
The best way to do it is with a big impact, give it 2 good or 3 good blurps with the gun just to break that Loctite. Just don't hammer it and just stay on it, because you'll round off the bolts on these. So found all body pressure, as you'll see, and we'll try to hopefully get lucky. Oh my gosh.
That is set on 3.
Yeah.
And it's on loosen.
Yeah. Maybe, you made me check right now too.
Oh, we're on there.
I need a beer now. I literally started like on the worst one. What are the
So
odds?
technically, we're saving the best for last.
Yeah. Sweet victory. So it's nice now with all the locker mechanisms out of the way. And then we can drop the ring gear off. Don't have to worry about damaging that. And it'll be good to go. But then we'll clean up the carrier. So that's the hot side. Identify the carrier bearings. Typically they're going to have a smaller base on the bearing itself. As you can see, then the pinion bearings have a larger base or mating surface for the pinion. So, and of course for our rear, we do have the new style roller bearing. And you can see it definitely has a different style race. About saving old parts, so you have these old internal races that you can use to press on the bearing itself, not the cage. Don't damage it, and then it slides right off, so you're good to go. So now that we have the pinion set, of course, we didn't add the seal yet or the crutch sleeve because that's not until we do final setup. So right now we just have the inner and outer bearing and have it kind of preloaded just by feel so we can start setting up our carrier and start checking all of our specs. We're gonna do that now, throw our carrier back in the housing and start checking our backlash, carrier preload, and hopefully start running a pattern to get a starting point and start making all of our adjustments. Liking it.
I know.
I like it. So now we talked about before, we're gonna be checking our backlash now, which you can hear that noise. That's the play between the ring gear and the pinion. So we're actually gonna check it with the gauge to confirm what it's set at. Ooh.
Look at that.
7.
Yes, sir. So though our backlash is showing good, we still need to run a pattern now because we don't know if our pinion depth is correct, but it's close enough. We'll get our first pattern and go from there. So for latest ring gear, as you can see, it has a concave to it. So this is always gonna be the drive side of your gear, which is the strongest side of the tooth. So when you're on the gas pedal, it's putting force on this side. And of course, this will be your coast side. So right now it looks like we're riding on the inside just a little bit. So we might be just a little bit deep on our pinion. So you have to kind of think of it in reverse, that it's riding on the inside. So our pinion on the back side is closer into the carrier. So it's running on the inside of the tooth. So we'll probably take out maybe 3/1000ths on the pinion and kind of see where that's gonna go and go from there. So the fun part of gears is that every change you gotta make is just in and out the carrier and pinion. So that's the tedious side of gears. So we're gonna add our 5 thou on the inside of our driver's side. So we're gonna push the carrier over. Well, not necessarily gonna push it over because we're not taking out here, but we are gonna do this to add carrier preload, but still even adding some of this, it's adding more preload and it will shift it over, push it over deeper into the gear. So we're gonna try that first before we start tearing apart the pinion. So it actually just smoothed out the pattern a lot more, a little more uniform, but we are still a little too far in. So we're gonna take out of the pinion a little bit, probably like 3 thousandths, and see what that does, and try to take it back the other way and go from there.
In and out, in and out.
So most of the gear jobs, we do have setup bearings for this, so we're not hammering on and hammering off brand new bearings and potentially damaging them. So we do take some good condition bearings and we hollow out the inside to open up the inner diameter. So that way we can slide these on and off really easy. It makes setup a lot smoother as we're not having to hammer on new bearings all the time. So definitely a good idea so you don't damage your new parts.
Socks on a rooster.
We're looking better.
Yeah, man, it's on. I mean, yeah, it looks really good. Look at the pattern.
No, it's actually not bad at all.
Yeah.
So
centered.
So yeah, we move the pattern back towards the center of it. And if you're gonna ride, I'd rather ride it on the inside just a little bit for gear deflection, but we're good. And what I like to see is I like to see a little hard line on top. That way we're not riding off the top of the tooth. So having that hard line of, your pattern on top, we're not riding off the end. So you can see we're coming right to the inside of the gear. Yeah, we're on the inside a little bit, but other than that, we're looking pretty good. Coast is looking good. So I think we're good actually.
Look at that,
yeah. So we do still have to check backlash. So since we're making some changes, we really haven't checked it yet. So we're not too bad actually. So worst case, pinion depth is good, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. And then we can start making some minute changes for our backlash if need to. We know our carrier preload is good, but
What is ideal backlash? What should that be?
so typically 5 the lowest, or I'm sorry, 6 to 10 is on your normal stuff. So these are the Adventex that you're gonna set up on the little tighter side. So, which they call for actually closer to 4.
Seems like a little excessive.
Dead nuts 4.
Really?
So we got our backlash at 4, which is the spec for these Adventech cut gears. So we should be good to go, and then we'll be able to do final assembly on the rear diff. So for final assembly, now we are going to install our crush sleeve and our brand new rear pinion bearing, and install our seal as well and get it all prepped, ready to go. Since we are installing our seal, we need to make sure we put our bearing in first, and then our spacer here for the yoke, and then we're gonna install our new seal. So these seals do have a little built-in sealer on them, but we've always tended just to add a little RTV to them just to prevent any long-term seeping of the seal around the outside, which you typically see. The whole diff will be soaking wet just from it seeping. So we always do tend to add some extra RTV. That to see where we're at, but we finally got a little bit of resistance, so I actually think we're pretty dang close. He's set to 14 to 16 inch-pounds. It's pretty light. Yeah, actually we're right under 15, so yeah, good.
Wheelhouse.
So we have our pinion preload set, And again, so that is setting the amount of pressure, compressing the inner and outer bearing together. So if you over tighten it, it can over compress the bearings and cause them to heat up faster and cause damage earlier. Again, another big thing we see all the time when people installing aftermarket drive lines, especially when swapping the yoke on this, they're pulling the stock one off and putting the new one on, but not realizing that with a big impact, they're zipping that nut on, and a big enough gun will still compress that crush sleeve. It's not set in place forever, so then you can accidentally over tighten your pinion. So just be aware of that when installing aftermarket drive lines.
So there was a question that I had earlier on in regards to the Curry gears. You said something specifically about the way these are cut.
Yeah, so these are Adventech cut, meaning if it's kind of hard to tell just from looking at them, but these have a longer sweeping tooth on them compared to your standard gears, which are a little bit shorter. So these are something they did on the JLs for, again, I guess better fuel economy kind of thing. But these are Adventech cut. So meaning for us, basically meaning they set up a little bit different. So these set up about the 4,000 backlash compared to like a JK will be like a 6,000 to 10,000 backlash. So they do set up a lot tighter. But that's just how they set up. And you can see too, typically the pattern's more sweeping and longer compared to like a JK, which you can see over there. It's more of sometimes of an oval pattern.
Can you point that out on the JK gears over here?
So this being a rear JK Dana 44, you can see how short of the tooth is, and it's not as long and sweeping as the Adventech gears. So a little bit different style, and you see the pattern's a little bit more oval and not so elongated.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah.
So this is across the board for all JLs and JTs, not just the Curry gears?
So actually this is just a Curry thing. I didn't know they were Advantech actually until we looked at the box this morning. But typically all other gears that we have installed are standard, I think 2-cut or 5-cut, which is not a big deal. It doesn't really change anything. It's just something that Curry decided to do on their Advantech or their gear kits. So
Perfect.
we always like to mark our bolts too as we're going through the final assembly, just to make sure, visual check as we're finalizing everything, that we did torque them. So it's kind of nice to have that reference point before we close everything up.
So it's pretty cool because for those of you who have a newer JL or JT, rather than having the drain bolts that we became familiar with, and which were really cool, Jeep has gone back to getting rid of those and just using a gasket now, which is actually pretty nice as well because you don't have to mess around with RTV or otherwise. It looks like we're gonna be able to maybe reuse it. Yeah, see, that works. On to the front.
Awesome. Got gears.
Yay! So as you just saw, it takes a bit of know-how and a step or two, a lot of effort really, to get a new set of gears installed on a Jeep Wrangler or JT Gladiator. And that is the reason again why I'm here at Disciple Offroad in Hanford, California. Now, if you live in the area or are willing to make the drive, they are who I would recommend you bring your Jeep to get your gears done. So there is one more very important step that you need to know after you get your gears done, and it's all about break-in. And Jeremy, you can explain to me what needs to happen. What do I need to know in order to get my gears running great for years to come?
Yeah, the break-in period is very important for a new set of gears. So what we want to do is get at least 5 heat cycles on the initial break-in, meaning we're going to get them nice and hot on the freeway, do about 15 to 20 miles. Be cruising, don't be going super fast, take it easy, but about 20 miles on the highway, go to a destination, have some lunch, let them fully cool the best you can, and then do that again about 5 times. So the idea is to get them to get hot and then cool down around 5 times for that initial heat break-in cycle.
So when you talk about getting onto the highway, like, you know, can I get up to like 90 miles an hour, or should I keep it at 55? Like, what do you think I should be at?
I mean, I would hang it around 70. I wouldn't try to go super fast because, again, we don't want to get them super hot, right? So it's very important to keep them somewhat cool, but, you know, don't overdo it on them. Again, you're not going to just blow them up, or they're not going to explode on you if you merge onto a freeway like normal. But just keep in mind you do have new gears. And additionally, though, while you're breaking those in too, going on the highway, you do want to let off the throttle once in a while to also work the coast side, or let that oil work in between those gears. Again, we talked about backlash. So let off the gas once in a while, let the coast side hit, and then kind of get on the throttle again. So you're kind of working those gears together.
Essentially change up your speeds.
Correct.
Don't always be at a solid floor, pedal to the floor. And then for cooling down, like, what do you think, like half an hour? You said like lunch, like about half an hour or so?
It can depend. Obviously, hotter weather is going to slow that process down. But again, it's not going to fully cool, and the hot differential is not going to, got heat soak and stuff from driving there. It's just not going to cool down completely. But ideally, they're going to get super hot and then let them cool down.
So then after we do these 5 heat cycles, ideally, what are we looking at, about, like 100 miles, 500 miles? Like, when should I do a differential change, oil change, after we're done with the heat cycles?
So after your initial heat cycles, about 500 miles is what we call for a break-in period, which we typically will pull the diff cover, drain the fluid, check, make sure there's no alarming chunks or any debris that shouldn't be there, and then we do a fresh oil change from that. And then from there, you're pretty much good to go. And again, with that, you don't want to tow up until after 1,000 miles on new gears. I would also maybe a little longer than that. You don't overstress them, but around 500 miles when we do the break-in.
So now this is the question that I get asked all the time, and it's in regards to your front axle. So now that we have FAD, and even when you had your JK, there's no load on it, do we actually need to do a fluid change up front? Do we need to worry about this right now?
Yeah, so with the FAD, nothing's moving up front when you're normal driving under two-wheel drive. So there's really no reason to do an oil change. Now I get asked all the time, should I just drive around a full-wheel drive until the break-in period? No, you don't have to do that. Go wheel it, have fun with it. You're gonna break them in, doing full wheeling, but other than that, drive it in two-wheel drive, and then over some time, do a fluid change. But other than that, you don't have to worry about the front per se. The rear is taking most of the load under normal driving conditions.
Perfect. So that's what we're going to be doing from here. Once we start heading back home, we actually do have a long drive, so we're going to be taking back roads. We're going to be mixing it up, and we'll be showing you what we're doing to get things prepped and get it ready so that our gears are going to last for years to come. And again, there's a reason why I'm here. I trust these guys. So I'm telling you guys, this is where you need to come as well. So there is actually one other important step other than the break-in process that needs to be done, and that's to have your Jeep's computer set to the proper gear ratio. Right now it still thinks we're running 410s, which is obviously not going to be the case anymore. So there are multiple devices that you can use. Taser is always a good one. I like using that. There's ECRI, or there's even what's called a J-Scan. You can download the app for pretty cheap. And there's a couple other devices that you need to get in order to make it work. All simple, cheap stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug in now. I'm going to turn on my key. to the run position. And then once everything's set up, I'm gonna be using my app to set my gear ratio. So we'll go to the Gladiator. We're gonna pick our adapter. We're gonna click on adaptations. We're gonna look for tires and axle settings. Then we're gonna look for axle ratio, which we're gonna click on there. The target value now is 488. That's what we installed. Click on done. Hit go. Changes applied successfully. To finish the procedure, we need to turn off the ignition and close and open the driver's side door 2 times and then leave the car for 5 minutes. So we're gonna hit OK. We're gonna turn off our Jeep. We're gonna close the door. And basically you need to let it go to sleep, go through the full cycle twice, and it'll be set. From there, we can just drive our Jeep home and our computer will know that we have 488 gears. All right, so we've taken this Jeep for a quick test drive just to make sure everything is good. Everything is. Right now on my odometer, I'm looking at 7,934 miles, and I'm making that point so that we kind of have a good idea of what 15 to 20 miles is so that we can do our cool down period, and also to give us an idea when we need to do our 500 mile refresh, basically, to drain the oil and put everything back together. So that's where we're at. Here we go.
Maybe we should actually set trip B.
Yeah. Oh yeah, good idea. Let me set my trip B. Trip B, zeroed out. Now we know. That was a good idea. How exciting, we got new gears. What I can tell you is that everything feels more like stock. The most annoying thing about driving on bigger tires, like 37-inch tires and 410 gears, is it's not that it doesn't have the power. It just hangs onto the gears way too long. So, for instance, I'm getting on the freeway right now. I'm already in 5th gear, heading into 6th. But before I would have hung into 3rd and just would have stayed there until I let off the gas pedal, and then maybe it would have shifted. But now all the shift points are basically stock, which is great, and it feels like I'm already in 7th gear, just moving through the transmission. I'm in 8th gear now. 8th gear, 1600 RPMs. It feels totally stock, and with our new 37-inch tires. Perfect. All right. So last night, obviously, we only got as far as our hotel, and now we're going to begin our real break-in period. All right, so as you can see here on the dash, we are at 23.5 miles. And of course, the objective was to stop at about 15 to 20 miles. We're just a little bit over, but I don't think that's a big deal. This is actually the first time we've had a chance to stop at an area where we could let things cool off. And as luck would have it, we haven't had any breakfast yet. So now is the perfect time to do that. Yep, it's pretty warm. So we just finished breakfast, and it's been maybe about a little over half an hour since we parked our Jeep. Let's see how it feels now. Oh yeah, way cooler. Now we just have to do it all over again. Alright, we've just put on a little more than 50 miles since our first heat cycle cool down period, and that means we need to do another. Of course, the entire way up, we've been just going easy on the gas, trying not to get above 70 miles an hour, mixing up our speed. And as before, we're just gonna go for a short walk, maybe take another 20, 30 minutes off, just to let the differential cool off, and then we'll be heading out again. Cool down number 3. All right, time for some gas and cool down number 4. And finally, our 5th and final cool down. Home at last. And according to the tripometer, we've racked up just a little over 285 miles since leaving Disciple Offroad. And that means we still need to add on an additional 200 miles or so before we service the rear differential. And during that time, we still need to be easy on our Jeep, but we won't need to do any more heat cycles or basically stop and let the rear end cool off. So be sure to check back soon because we've got a video on how to service our differential coming up next.